our presenters today, and at this point our session will be recorded. Again, this is Justin Begley with the Center for Urban Transportation Research, and I would like to introduce today's speakers, William Morris and Christopher Dianantis. William Morris is a Senior Research Associate for the Center for Urban Transportation Research. He specializes in providing technical assistance to transit systems with a focus on transit feasibility studies, marketing studies, and transit development plans. He also offers extensive experience in community research, paratransit, and Americans with Disabilities Act planning, transit MPO planning process, fair policy, public involvement, and long-term strategic planning, having served as the Strategic Planning Project Management Manager for the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority and a transit planner for the Hillsborough Area Regional Transit Authority. Christopher Dianantis is a Senior Research Associate at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. He has provided technical assistance in transit operations and planning for nearly 15 years. He has developed transit feasibility studies for cities and counties throughout the state of Florida and has extensive experience in creating transit development plans and analyzing operational issues. He also specializes in developing strategies to design bus routes, stops, and schedules that improve efficiencies and reduce cost. Mr. Dianantis previously worked as transit planner for both Sarasota County Area Transit and the Hillsborough Area Regional Transit Authority. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our presenters to take you through.
Thank you, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bill Morris speaking. I will be doing the bulk of the presentation today, and then Chris will be coming in at the end for the question and answer portion of this. First of all, I want to thank you all so much for coming out today. I clearly realize that in our daily lives, when we strike up a conversation with another person, rarely is the topic rear-end bus collisions. And even in our professional lives, unless we hold specific jobs within a transit agency, this is also not a likely topic of conversation. However, there is an irony to that particular point, and that is after 18 years of being in this job called research, this is the most interesting project that Chris and I have ever been involved with. And hopefully I'll be able to convey to you why it is so interesting. But essentially, this was a project that pretty much every path that we went down led to new discovery that was immediately followed by new questions. Secondly, it illuminates the value of research while at the same time highlighting its limitations, meaning we can't answer every question there is. And then finally, this was a study wherein the human element, which was consultation with the transit agencies, was every bit as important to the outcome of the study as was every piece of data that was collected. So how did this study come about? Well, essentially there were some transit systems in the state who were contacting our FDOT central office and kind of sounding the alarm, saying we're having significant problems with rear-end collisions in our bus system. Those are on the rise, and we would like to know if other areas of the state are experiencing the same thing. So one of the main purposes for this study was, number one, to determine if there is a prevalence of rear-end collisions, and then whether or not those collisions are increasing, and then really to try to identify the conditions that exist when rear-end collisions occur. And then, of course, whenever possible, to identify mitigation strategies for the transit agencies who have identified rear-end collisions as a major issue. So how were we able to accomplish the mission for this study? Well, it turns out the Federal Transit Administration has a national transit database. This is something where transit agencies report every year on an annual basis relative to their operations, their finance, their maintenance, other areas. But it turns out there is also a dynamic reporting process for what are called major incidents and minor incidents. And in this case, there are criteria and definitions for what constitutes a major incident, but virtually all collisions are major incidents. There are some in the minor category, but they're usually in the fender bender category. And so the database compiles all of the major incidents that are reported by agencies from all 50 states and United States territories. And beginning in 2008, the reporting system included rear-ended and rear-ending as collision types. And if you will bear with me for just a moment, I will get into the detail of exactly what those two terms mean. So from there, we were able to aggregate the data by FTA region. That was a function of convenience because you have several hundred reporting transit agencies, and so we needed to come up with a way to harness the data. And then for comparison, we used rear-ended and rear-ending collisions as a percentage of total collisions, and as well collisions per 100,000 miles. So when we are looking for the question of how severe is severe, how significant is significant, these are the two data sets that will actually lead us to that particular place. So starting with wait a minute, didn't I have a picture here? Okay. Okay, so how can I define the difference between a rear-ended and a rear-ending collision? Well, essentially, if you have an automobile, a car, a truck, a minivan, etc., if that vehicle impacts the rear of the bus, then that means the bus has been rear-ended. However, if the bus impacts the rear of a car, SUV, etc., then that is a rear-ending collision. So what we find in this particular case is that rear-ended collisions from a transit perspective are more prevalent than rear-ending collisions in general. So in this first slide, you're looking at our national profile, the United States plus territories, for the years 2008, 2012. And what we see here is in terms of total motor bus collisions, the number remains fairly stable until we get to 2012, and there was a spike of about 400 collisions between 2011. And from there in red in the middle ground, those are the rear-ended collisions for the United States plus territories. And then in blue in the foreground, those are the rear-ending collisions for the United States plus territories. Overall, total collisions per 100,000 miles from 2008 to 2012, we see 0.2 total collisions per 100,000 miles with rear-ended collisions at 0.07 and rear-ending at 0.011. Now, you don't need to worry about absorbing this data right now because you will see it in other contexts later in the presentation. And then correspondingly, rear-ended collisions as a percentage of total collisions, that would be in red in the background. If you slice the average across the board there, you're at about 20%, or 1 in every 5 collisions is a rear-ended collision at the national level. So from there, as we mentioned earlier, we aggregated the data by FTA region. I obviously can't put all of the states associated with all of the regions before you for this presentation. So what I will highlight for you is that Florida is in Region 4. And what this, well, Region 4, first of all, it's the largest region in terms of having 8 states and 2 territories. With Region 9, which contains California, having 6 states and 2 territories. But essentially what we found, and this was across the board from 2008 to 2012, was that Region 5 always had the most total collisions, but Region 4 always had the most rear-ended collisions. And so this was where the bell started to ring right from the very beginning, meaning the question is Florida kind of pushing Region 4 over the top? And roughly the answer to that question is yes, it is. If you were to remove Florida's data from Region 4, then these numbers would go significantly down. All right, so now we were able to aggregate data at the national level and then at the FTA region level. And now here is the profile for Florida collisions over the period 2008 to 2012. We had a high of 336 total collisions in 2012 with a low of 276 in 2010. And then our rear-ended collisions ranged from 97 in 2010 to 128 in 2012. Again, the reason I don't focus on rear-ending collisions is because there is nothing about Florida's data that is really out of sync with the rest of the country. So here we see now with our percentage breakdown of rear-ended and rear-ending collisions to total collisions, we had a high of 43% in 2009 and concluding with 38% in 2012. And then finally, these are the collisions per 100,000 miles. So we had a total of 0.3 for the total collisions, and then 0.1 for rear-ended collisions, and 0.01 for rear-ending collisions for that at concluding in 2012. Excuse me. All right, so now from the national to the region to the state, we are able to actually analyze the data all the way down to the property level, and that's because this data is reported at the property level. And it just so happens that when the scope of this study was being developed, there were two systems in the state that were pre-selected for further study, even though we had no idea of this data at the time. And it turns out that Broward County Transit and LINCS, which is the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority, both showed an upward trend in both total collisions and also in rear-ended collisions across the 5-year period. So here is the raw data with total collisions in blue, rear-ended in red, and rear-ending in green. And as well with LINCS, they also showed an upward trend over the 5-year period in terms of total collisions and rear-ended collisions. So we were kind of lucky that we pre-selected those two systems. Okay, so here is now a comparison of total collisions per 100,000 miles for Florida at 0.28 in green, Region 4 at 0.25 in red, and then for the United States and territories at 0.20 in blue in 2012. So we see that our rate is higher than both the region and the nation as a whole. Rear-ended collisions, we see a little bit greater severity with 0.04 for the United States plus territories in 2012, 0.08 for Region 4, and then 0.11, which is almost triple the national rate for Florida. Okay, after we had done a comparison with Florida to Region 4, we thought maybe it would be a good idea to compare our collision data with the 6 most populous states. And so there you see at the bottom, those states are illuminated. And when I go to the next slide here, this is showing the percent of rear-ended collisions as a percent of total collisions for the 6 most populous states in red in the background. And clearly, we are more than triple California, New York, and Illinois, and then more than double Texas. So this slide was where we really began to understand the magnitude of rear-ended bus collisions in Florida as opposed to these other states, these other places. However, we also do have some researchers here at CUTR who work with collision data on the highway side. And it appears to be somewhat of a mystery that Florida's collision data always seems to rise to the top no matter what the topic is. So, for instance, if you think of pedestrian fatalities or bicycle fatalities, Florida always shoots to the top. And so the answer to that is no one really knows the answer as to why that is the case. So it is worth noting that our data appears to be significant no matter the topic. Okay, and then collisions per 100,000 miles in the 6 most populous states. This is one where Illinois, for total collisions, had 0.48, where compared to Florida's 0.28. But then Florida's rear-ended collisions per 100,000 miles was almost 0.11, with Illinois at 0.069 being the closest. All right, I'm going to move now into the next part of the study, which was to review collision files at links, of which we reviewed 55 files for rear-ended collisions over the period of 2011 and 2012. And then at Broward County Transit, we reviewed 51 rear-ended collision files from 2011 to 2013. And from there, we coded absolutely as much data as we could possibly code by reviewing those files. Now, obviously, I can't go over all of these for the purpose of our webinar, but essentially, what I will tell you is that the first four, route direction, which would be eastbound, westbound, northbound, southbound, there was nothing significant from the coding of that data. As far as roadway surface, most of the time it was dry. For lighting conditions, most of the time it was light. And for weather conditions, most of the time it was clear or cloudy. All right, so these factors did not seem to, I mean, if you look at the most dangerous conditions of being dark, raining, and wet, then these were not major factors. So what I am going to do, highlight for you, are the roadway factors, because and then at least one of the transit factors as well. So this slide that you're looking at now, these are the corridors in Broward County that all had greater than one rear-ended collision over a 2-year period. And this is true for both Lynx and Broward. Both of them have one corridor that seems to be especially problematic. And in the case of Broward County, that would be US 441, which is a major north-south arterial running through the center of the service area, followed by Broward County, University Drive, Sunrise Boulevard, etc. All of these facilities happen to have one thing in common, and that is they are all 6-lane divided state facilities except for Coconut Creek Parkway. As well with Lynx, the especially problematic corridor is Orange Blossom Trail, which is also a major north-south arterial, also in the central part of the Central Florida area. And with 11 collisions over a 2-year period, which actually basically for every facility that had greater than one rear-ended collision, 1 in 3 of those was occurred on Orange Blossom Trail. So the roadway jurisdiction at the rear-ended collision location, what we find is we have a vast majority occurring on state roads with a slightly higher prevalence for links on local roads. And as well, we're looking at basically 3 of every 4, roughly, collisions are occurring on a state road. And then the number of lanes, we have 4 divided, 6 divided, and 8 divided as being the location of the most collisions. And putting this in perspective of percentages, essentially 4-lane divided and 6-lane divided facilities constitute the majority of collisions that occur within the service area. And then finally, this is putting together the lanes, whether they're divided or undivided, and then what the jurisdiction is. And again, we see 6-lane divided state arterials as being the most prevalent, and at a percentage of 55% for Broward and 40% for Lynx. Here is an aerial of a rear-ended collision location in Broward County. What I will do is draw your eyes to the upper right of this particular aerial. You see there are 2 left turn queues, 3 travel lanes, and 1 right turn queue. This is a very, very typical intersection in Broward County. This particular collision was occurring on a southbound trip at a far side stop to the intersection. All right, so stop type, just in case there might be some of you not familiar, if you think of an intersection a signalized intersection, a near side bus stop would be before the signal, a far side stop would be after the signal on the other side, and then a mid-block bus stop is not at an intersection at all, but between intersections. And so here we have the breakdown of the collisions at far side. Basically, Lynx had 19 total collisions, Broward had 15. Mid-blocks, Broward had a total of 18 collisions at a mid-block stop, and Lynx had 15. And then for near sides, Broward had 14 and Lynx had 15. So what basically we see here is that there is not a slam dunk in terms of any one type of bus stop actually being more contributory to collisions than the other types of bus stops. Bus movement, this is an important part of this. At the time of the collision, virtually a vast majority of the buses were stopped at the time that the collision occurred. And then the posted speed limit, this is Broward only. You see we have kind of a majority there at the 40 to 45 mile an hour mark, or about 71%, 70% of all the collisions that occurred in Broward County. Okay, moving into the consultation with the transit agencies, there were basically 4 different areas that we addressed: operations, risk management, training, and technology. Obviously, I cannot, with the time that we have with this particular webinar, go into all 4 of these. But what I do want to focus on are the technology improvements to the rear of bus. Now, I'm not going to read all of these to you because in just a second I'm going to show you a visual. But essentially, all of these different improvements have been at one time contemplated. They have been tried and retained, and they have also been tried and eliminated. But I think one of the things that best to convey about this is that there is virtually no agreement across transit agencies as to the effectiveness of all of these various treatments. Now, I have a pointer tool, and I'm going to try to use it. I'm hoping it'll work. This is the rear exterior treatments of a LeeTran bus. The features here include 8 LED lights, 4 of which are red for stop and 4 of which are amber, which are usually associated with turn signals. There is an illuminated yield sign on the bus, as well as on the lower left a non-illuminated yield to bus sign on the bus. Towards the bottom on the bumper, there is reflective striping, and a sign that also says this vehicle stops at all railroad crossings. There are at the top of the bus 4 additional red lights across the top, and then finally in the center a flashing stop sign. So essentially we receive feedback from many who say that they think that all of these treatments on the rear of the bus can actually mesmerize other vehicles, and such that they do not achieve the objective of actually reducing collisions. There are other properties who said if they have the flashing stop on the rear of the bus, they train their operators to depress the brake as soon as possible to give the drivers behind the bus the most lead time to know that the bus will be coming to a stop. So, we also got feedback from another property who said they had the flashing stop signs and it confused motorists because they thought they had to stop for the bus just like they stop for a school bus. Again, there's just not clear agreement on whether these treatments really are effective at reducing collisions. This is now moving into our synthesis and conclusions section of our study. This is showing data for PalmTran, which is an agency that has comparatively high total collisions per 100,000 miles. In the rear in blue is PalmTran in 2012 at 0.36 versus 0.28 for Florida. 0.25 for region 4, 0.22 for the 6 most populous states, and 0.2 for the national aggregate data. And then this is total collisions per 100,000 miles, comparing Florida transit agencies to the Florida aggregate data. And what we see in the case of Pasco, they have a low number of miles, but HART, PalmTran, PSDA, BCT, Lynx, those are among our larger systems, had higher rates of total collisions per 100,000 miles than many of our smaller systems, which are below the Florida aggregate line. And then next we will look at HART, which is an agency with comparatively high rear-ended collisions per 100,000 miles in the rear, at 0.21 in 2012 for HART, 0.11 for Florida in 2012, 0.08 for Region 4, 0.04 for the 6 most populous states, and 0.04 for the national aggregate U.S. plus territories. Again, rear-ended collisions per 100,000 miles, a comparison at the agency level in comparison to the aggregate data. And once again, we see our larger systems and even LeeTran, one of our less larger systems, having a higher rate than our aggregate data, and then lower for our smaller systems. And then as a percentage of, as rear-ended collisions as a percentage of total collisions, here we have Lynx, which is comparatively high at 59% in 2012 compared to Florida at 38%, Region 4 at 32%, the 6 most populous states at 17%, and then the national aggregate data at 18%. Again, comparing the agencies to the Florida aggregate data, you see that we actually have, at the system level, higher percentages, but in some cases with smaller systems, they have very, very few collisions, but almost all of them are rear-ended collisions. I mean, that happened actually in a couple of our agencies. 100% of their collisions were rear-ended collisions. So that's why these percentages can appear to kind of be very high, even though the number of collisions is very low. And then this is the average total collisions every X days over a 5-year time frame. And what we find is that Broward, on average, has one collision every 6 days, Lynx one every 8 days, HART one every 10 days. And then as well, rear-ended collisions, Lynx has on average one every 16 days, Broward on average once every 19 days. So again, these would be the problem areas. All right, so with mitigation strategies, a lot of them are somewhat technical to the transit agencies. As far as Lynx and Broward are concerned, and certainly any transit system, our suggestion was to take the low-hanging fruit. So if you have a significant number of collisions on US 441 or Orange Blossom Trail, then conduct an evaluation of that corridor to see if there are treatments that could be made to the bus stops to make them safer. But essentially, post-collision investigation is an important part of trying to understand what happened in the before and after the collision as a mechanism to try to reduce future collisions. The next one is to move, improve, or remove bus stops. We actually do have one system in Florida that if there's a collision at a bus stop, they might just yank it right out of the ground, only because there was a collision that occurred there. But there may be other aspects of the location and design and construction of bus stops that may be also contributory towards collisions. Post-collision training for individual operators, and again, transit agencies, because they each have their own policies and procedures and training, this means different things to different agencies in terms of what they do in post-collision with the operators. Annual in-service trainings, training for operators to maximize the technology enhancements that are available on the bus. And finally, at the end, once again, we come to that point that every transit system has their policies and procedures and training, but not all agree with each other on the effectiveness of their policies and procedures. So they very much believe in their own policies and procedures. They don't necessarily agree with everybody else's, is kind of the point here. And then I'm going to conclude the presentation with what I'm calling the IT questions. Now, you know, the IT questions are really about what are the underlying factor or factors that are contributing to our higher rate of rear-ended bus collisions. Is it the amount of service on the facility? So the more hours, the more buses that you have on a particular facility, does that in and of itself make it more conducive for collisions? Could it be the conditions at the bus stop? Could that be the major contributory factor? Is it the design of the road network itself? You know, clearly there was a prevalence of 6-lane state facilities that we saw in the collision profiles. Or is it something about traffic operations? And essentially, there are aspects of these questions wherein we may never know the answer because, for instance, what if it's factors beyond just these 4 that are contributory towards rear-ended bus collisions? But also, you know, we may never know, for instance, on the design of the road network, you know, the first question would be, what are your benchmarks? What are you comparing it to? What is the ideal road design? What is the least ideal road design? So in an effort like this, designing the questions would be as difficult as trying to glean the answers. So as we move towards the next phases, essentially, I think what we need to do is to focus on factors that are within the control of the transit agency. So we may never have control again over the design of the road network or traffic operations. And to look at all collisions and reportable incidents. You know, one of the things that kind of came out of this study is while rear-ended collisions may be the most prevalent, they may not be the most expensive. There was one safety person at a transit agency who told us that the bus is usually driven away and the car is usually towed away. So the damage to the bus sometimes is not extremely severe. And then to look at best practices in post-collision investigation, which would also include factors such as the bus stop location and design. And then as well, best practices in risk management and how those practices might play a role in preventing future collisions. So with that, Justin, I am going to go ahead and conclude the presentation for today, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Bill, I'm going to just take it over for one quick second before we start the Q&A. I just wanted to remind everybody that a copy of the presentation as well as a copy of the report that this presentation is based upon is located in the handout section of Live Meeting, and that is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. It looks like 3 white sheets of paper. We are opening the floor for Q&A time, so simply press that Q&A button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, type your question or comment, and then submit Ask. And then that question will be moderated by Justin. So with that, Justin, it looks like we do have a couple questions, and I'll hand the floor back over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Bill and Chris. I'm going to go ahead, and we do have some questions that have come in. I have the first one here, and I think it's one that might be on the mind of quite a few of our listeners because it's kind of a hotly debated issue. Do you have any analysis or results for far or near side stops that have bus bays, either open or closed bays?
What we found within our study, I believe over the entire 2-year period for both properties, there were 2 collisions that occurred at a bus bay, and neither one of them had anything to do with the bus bay. So there was just as an example, there was a woman who was trying to avert another collision and ended up hitting the bus in the bus bay, but it had nothing to do with the bus bay. So there was nothing in our review of collision files that established bus bays as being contributory or not even necessarily safer either.
Okay. Excuse me. We have another question here. I'm going to read it. It says, Florida is one of the states that does next to nothing to discourage using your cell phone while driving. Perhaps that contributes to buses getting rear-ended. how does Florida compare to other states with and without laws dealing with cell phone use? And did you look into accident reports to determine if cell phones were being used by those who rear-ended a bus?
Okay, so the first part of the question is we did not compare distracted driving relative to cell phones for Florida to other states. So that was not a part of our study. What we did find in the review of files is there were a couple of instances where people did confess that their distraction was via cell phone. There were even some confessions of other types of distractions not related to cell phone usage. But generally speaking, if law enforcement asks the person were they distracted, if the answer is no, then it is generally accepted.
Okay. So we have another question. What are the implications for law enforcement in rear-ended bus collisions?
Essentially, what we find is that unless there is suspicion of a crime, such as homicide, manslaughter, or drug and alcohol use, that being involved in a collision is not a crime, and therefore people are not questioned in the same manner that a suspect would be questioned in a crime. So what happens is we see statutory language in the police reports that essentially say the person failed to use due care or failed to use due caution without really any further insight into what caused that failure.
Okay. Now we've had a couple more questions come in, all kind of related to other drivers, distracted driving. What explanations are given by motorists who rear-end these transit buses?
Essentially, this was what we got from contacting the transit agencies. The story that they most often get is that the individual says that they saw the bus, but they didn't realize it was stopped. And so that is basically the best explanation that we have in terms of people on the ground who have actually interacted with drivers who have hit buses in the rear.
Okay. Another question following up asks, could it help that buses could have rear-facing cameras installed to record how the vehicle approached the bus and some idea of what the driver was doing or not doing at the time of the collision?
Yeah, when we asked the transit agencies, do you think it's valuable to have a camera on the exterior rear of the bus, interestingly, most of them said no. There are a cadre of cameras that are posted on the exterior of buses as well as on board, and transit systems absolutely indicate that they do utilize all of those tools, including all of the cameras, post-collision in order to get to the bottom of basically what happened.
Okay, another question asks, can you link dwell time to the chance of a rear-end crash?
That was not a part of this particular research effort, no.
Okay. And it looks like we're going to wrap up with one of our last questions is, are the bus operators automatically exonerated if they're rear-ended by another vehicle?
Absolutely not. What our transit agencies told us is that a full and complete investigation occurs in post-collision to determine if the operator did anything that might have contributed to the collision, such as, for instance, stopping suddenly because they see a passenger that they didn't previously see, or that kind of thing. And so it is not true that the operator is automatically exonerated, but there are differences, again, policies, procedures, training between transit systems in terms of how that is later addressed with the operator in post-collision.
Okay, it's great. We still got some questions coming in. I have another one here that's it's more a comment than a question, and it says it would appear that automated vehicle technology could eliminate these type of accidents. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, not at this time. Again, it wasn't a part of this particular study.
Yeah, and I think the question or comment might be in context of automated vehicle technology, just as driverless vehicles potentially, but that's maybe more not necessarily something you might have been looking at. So I have another question. Is the state updating the training procedures?
That is a question, Justin. I believe that they are discussing that right now in terms of coming up with some minimum criteria for training, but I don't know. I believe it's the state in consultation with the agencies.
Okay. Well, it looks like that about wraps up all the Q&A. I don't have any other questions at this time. I would ask that everybody who attended today, first of all, we thank you for attending the presentation. We would ask that you take a moment to fill out the evaluation. The evaluation should be coming up here. There it is. If you could please take a moment, fill out your evaluation of this webcast. As always, all CUTR webcasts are submitted for AICP credits. And I'm going to go ahead and just again say thank you and hope we see you again in 2 weeks for our next presentation.